Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's town hall with President Green. It's the Town Hall on Workers' Rights Night here at IBEW Local 1. My name is Jim Fall. I have been asked to be the moderator tonight, and I'm a partner at the law offices of Hartnett Reyes Jones here in St. Louis. Want to thank the audience for the attending, and especially thank the good men and women of IBEW Local 1 for allowing us to be in this wonderful facility. IBEW Local 1 has done a proud history here in St. Louis and has done a lot of good work both with the trades and outside and in the community over the last 100 years in the city of St. Louis, and they're continuing that tradition today by allowing us to be here. I'd like to let everyone know that the conversation today is being led by questions that have been turned in prior to the town hall. And folks have been filling in forms. There are going to be some forms in the back if more people would like to fill out some questions that we may or may not be able to get to. However, I want to make sure that folks have the opportunity to at least present questions. And if we don't get them answers to or responses to them tonight, we will certainly do our best to address them at some time in the future privately. Also, a quick change to our agenda. Marianne Sade is unfortunately not being able to be here with us tonight. She sends her apologies. And not having her here will, unfortunately, we won't be able to rely on her expertise as we would if she had been here, obviously. But I know the esteemed panel here is going to do their best, and we're going to address the issues presented to us in the best way possible. We're having this town hall workers' rights meeting because right now in Missouri, there's a number of proposed changes in Jefferson City about workers' rights, leading from changes in unemployment benefits, changes in workers' compensation benefits, changes in how our local government, including here in the city of St. Louis, can use its resources to address the needs of working people and preempt those in ways that many in this room and some outside this room might think are harmful to the interests of men and women in their working lives. So part of what we're trying to do here today is address through some of the folks on the panel what's happening, how we can address and improve the lives of the men and women who work in this city and this region to make it better, and make sure that we have a profitable and family supporting work life. People work 8 hours a day, and then have 8 hours to live their lives in the way that they see fit, and sometimes they sleep after that. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel in no particular order, other than I am starting with President Green.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. Thank you, Jim. Thanks for moderating, and I want to thank the panel for lending all of your expertise and coming tonight, and also thank IBEW Local 1 for hosting and the members of the public for their time today. My name is Megan Aaliyah Green. I'm president of the Board of Aldermen, and this issue is really hits home for me. I was raised in a union family. My mom was president of her local teachers union while I was growing up. I saw her advocate for teachers. I saw her get pulled in front of the school board for teaching things like A Handmaid's Tale because books were under attack even 25 years ago when she was teaching. And those values really instilled in me this saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. And if we really invest in people, we invest in good wages, strong benefits, that it helps everyone. And especially if we invest in the folks that have the least, it helps to rise the tide for everyone else. And as Board of Aldermen president, I have the privilege of being able to set the agenda for the board and for citywide policy. And I also have the ability to establish working groups to help bring different partners in our community together to work on various pieces of legislation with alder people, with residents, with advocates, with stakeholders, to make sure that what we are doing at the Board of Aldermen is really reflective of the needs and wants of folks in our community. we know that well-resourced communities are the safest communities. And when we have higher wages, better benefit packages, and access to quality, affordable housing, childcare, all of those ancillary benefits that can come with a good job, ultimately it helps to lift folks out of poverty, and it also helps to keep people out of the criminal justice system. And we know that major corporations are benefiting right now from record-setting profits. And if common decency won't compel them to do the right thing, then it's up to us as legislators, as community advocates, as union leaders to apply pressure by advocating, legislating, and organizing for workers' rights. At the same time, we're seeing massive amounts of union mobilization and organization that is happening across this country. It's wonderful to see the amount of folks that are rising up and saying, you know, you're not going to generate profits off of our backs without us being able to reap some of the rewards from our labor. And so I'm interested in learning more today about how we can support workers in our community. We know that in Missouri, workers are under attack. Missouri lawmakers are often influenced by special interest groups, and this has kept local lawmakers from being able to create benefits locally that are in excess of state law. We call this preemption. But my office is committing to both organizing against the state level preemption while also figuring out ways locally that we can work around it to enact the best policies possible to support working people in our community. And to that end, also making sure that workers are a part of development decisions that are coming through the Board of Aldermen and are centered in that, to make sure that living wages, good benefits, good jobs are a part of the economic development strategy for our city. So thank you everybody for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much, President Green. And actually talking about economic development and those projects that improve the region, not only for the men and women who can make the projects, but the men and women who also then will work there afterwards and utilize these projects once they are completed. I'd like to turn it over for an introduction to Mr. Stephen Davis.
Good evening, everyone, and again, thanks for having me. My name is Steve Davis. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives for the St. Louis Development Corporation. For those who may not be familiar with us, we are the independent economic development agency for the city of St. Louis. We oversee the 9 development boards. If you think about the Port Authority, the Land Reutilization Authority, the Land Clearance for Utilization Authority, and others, we are directed by a board of volunteers who then staff those different agencies. And again, our mission is to stimulate the market for business and real estate development in the city of St. Louis. And really, our mission has changed over the past couple of years. I'm fortunate tonight to sit in place for my CEO, Neil Richardson, who is leading our organization through the Economic Justice Action Plan, which is really guided by 3 pillars. The first being equitable and inclusive development. So as we're evaluating projects in the city, making sure that we're not incentivizing projects in locations that have traditionally been incentivized, but how do we drive investment to parts of our neighborhoods that traditionally have not been invested in. The second pillar is economic empowerment, so working with our small businesses and making sure that they have the resources and capital to scale and grow in the city of St. Louis. A little over a year ago, we opened what's called the Northside Economic Empowerment Center, located at Sumner High School, really geared at working with small businesses and providing them access to capital and providing that back office support so that they can be successful and continue to grow. Also working with our minority and women-owned business enterprises, ensuring as they're going out to compete for some of these larger projects that they can be competitive. So we assist them through the estimating process. We help them put together their bids, again, so they can become more competitive. And we recently released 3 programs, one called Mobilize STL, which provides below market rate loans for contractors so they can purchase the necessary equipment, again, to be more competitive for these larger projects. And then the last pillar that really guides our work is neighborhood transformation. So being present in community, leveraging existing assets and co-creating with community to create new assets so we can have a vibrant, thriving neighborhoods throughout our city. As it relates to workers' rights, there's 2 programs I really wanted to highlight that SLDC has been participating in. One is through the National League of Cities in partnership with the Department of Labor. It's called the Good Jobs, Great Cities Initiative. And really the goal is to benefit we will benefit from this unique opportunity to engage not only the Department of Labor, but other federal agencies and national thought leaders to identify and convene employers and other stakeholders within targeted subsectors such as infrastructure, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing, and making sure that we're creating pathways to these careers and access to these jobs for our residents here in St. Louis. Part of that program as well is to identify and address gaps and shortcomings in the education and workforce systems, and developing new and scale new initiatives, again, just to expand that access. We also look to implement strategies that ensure infrastructure, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing career opportunities are high quality and support long-term economic viability within these communities. The last program I would like to highlight before I pass it along is we are in partnership with Accelerator for America, called the LINE Initiative. So it's leveraging infrastructure networks for equity, and that is in partnership with the Department of Labor and the Women's Bureau, again, to create new pathways for residents to attain good jobs and sustainable, livable wages. So again, thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like, if possible, someone I just met this evening, if you could introduce yourself, Rhiannon Durea.
Good evening, and thank you for having us here today, President Green. My name is Rhiannon Duryea. I'm the Executive Director for the SEIU Missouri-Kansas State Council. Here in Missouri, we represent two SEIU locals, our healthcare local, who represents long-term care and behavioral health workers predominantly, as well as Local 1, which is our property services local. About 10,000 members statewide. I am grateful to be here at IBEW this evening. Growing up in St. Louis, my mom was an IBEW member working for Ameren, and our family story is really one of the union difference. Because she was a union member when she was diagnosed with cancer, our family was not completely decimated. She had health care coverage benefits, and for the entire last year of her life was able to receive that health care and those benefits. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that's because she had a union, and that's what keeps me going in this work. The tragedy that our family faced is not unique to us, but unfortunately it was unique that we were a union family. And so the work that I do with SEIU is to make it easier for workers to unionize, to strengthen worker protections so that people can live their life. They can have the bread and they can have the roses, and their labor on the job can go towards providing a better life for their family, just as the work that my mom did provided a better life for my sister and I. And so I'm thankful to be here this evening, excited to talk about some of the challenges as well as some of the opportunities that our state and our city faces, and what we can do together to create a more worker-friendly landscape.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duryea, and I appreciate the courtesies and the grace. Last and not least, I want to introduce Mr. John Karhoff. John?
Thank you. First, thanks, President Green. Also, I want to echo her thoughts. Thank you for coordinating this discussion. I hope this is the first of many to come like this with different panelists. And I appreciate everybody's interest in ensuring the welfare of the residents, working families in our community. My name is John Karhoff. I'm a 42-year member of Local 1. I know I'm an old guy. And I am a representative. I became a full-time representative in 2011. And I'm an organizer, and I fight to protect and sustain the hard-won living standards of the IBEW members I represent. I also enforce prevailing wage law for electrical workers, even those that I don't personally represent. The IBEW Local 1, the IBEW was founded here in St. Louis in 1891. We're the flagship local union. We've got 881 local unions in the country, 750,000 members now. Nationwide, and I also host a labor history podcast. There's a museum down on Leffingwell in the Vanderloo neighborhood on Leffingwell and Martin Luther King. I hope all of you will take time to stop in there and see that's the building we were founded in 1891.
Thank you very much, and I will echo that. It's a wonderful museum for those of you who are interested not only in issues of labor union history, but of St. Louis history. It's a proud and very unique thing that we have here, and I encourage everybody to take it, to see it and experience it themselves. Moving on to the panel discussions, I'm going to move past the legal landscape to make sure that we're on target here. Move to the second question. This is one that was set forth beforehand, and the question I would like to start with President Green, which is, with the announcement of a hiring freeze and lean budget for the upcoming fiscal year for the city of St. Louis, how do you plan to assist city workers with suitable cost of living increases?
First of all, I'll say that, the first hope for us is that this court case that is attacking the earnings tax does not end up going against the city of St. Louis. If the reason we are in the position we are with a very conservative budget for this year is because of the threat of losing the earnings tax for remote workers, which would be about a budget shortfall of about $26 million a year is what we're anticipating at this point in time. With that said, last year we had a little bit over $70 million budget surplus as a city. And that was not because revenues were up across the board necessarily. It was mostly because of vacant positions that we have in city government that we had budgeted for but never got filled. I think that we're at the point where we have to recognize that with the number of vacancies that we have, we need to get very realistic about the positions that we will actually fill within the next fiscal year or two, and be willing to reallocate some of those funds that are currently in the budget for positions that we know are not going to be filled into our city workers. Because we know when we're short-staffed, our city workers are having to do 2 and 3 jobs in order to make up for the shortfall in workers. And so I think this ultimately comes down to our ability to reform some of our personnel and some of the positions that we currently have budgeted for in our city budget, and reallocate that to our city workers. Because as of right now, our city workers are getting a 1.5% merit increase this year, but they are not getting the 3% cost of living adjustments that they've been getting the last few years. And prior to the last few years, we know many city workers had not gotten raises in almost a decade. So our workforce is already operating at a deficit for where they should be in terms of wages and compensation, given where we've been over the last decade. So the way in the short term, I think, to make this right is by reallocating some of those funds from vacant positions into salaries.
Ms. Duryea or Mr. Karhoff, both of you have organizations that represent public workers. Do you have anything to add?
I would just like to thank President Green for the foresight in reallocating some of that surplus from vacant positions to meeting the needs of current workers, and acknowledging the fact that public workers right now are having to do a lot of work and need to see the compensation reflect that, because otherwise we're going to lose good people doing important jobs. And so quality pay, quality benefits is what's going to help keep people around and ensure that our much needed public services stay up and running and serving the people of St. Louis.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, all of us who live in the city of St. Louis certainly do think the world of the men and women who make this place run for us. A lot of times, even though we don't see it happen, we notice when it doesn't happen, and they do the yeoman's work for us all. So thank you. The next question is actually directed to you, Ms. Duryea. Says that, as we know, the state of Missouri preempts St. Louis from enacting certain laws related to employment, including minimum wages and employee benefits for legal purposes. Actually, as I said before, there's currently a bill to preempt the city's ability to add job requirements for development projects in the city as well. Are there areas of pro-worker legislation that the city can pursue, in your opinion, despite the state's overreach?
Yes, thank you. I first want to acknowledge that this is not a unique problem to Missouri or to St. Louis. Unfortunately, across the country, corporations are using their influence in right-wing legislatures to chip away at decades-long, hard-fought worker rights protections across the country, whether it's weakening child labor laws or getting rid of rest breaks like we've seen in Kentucky, or stamping down the ability for cities to increase minimum wages right here in Missouri. This is a problem that is impacting people across the country, but is felt deeply at home as well. And unfortunately, the right is very creative in all of the different ways that they can seek out to preempt worker protections and make it easier for corporations to extract as much profit as they can from both their workers and the city where they're based. And so we have to be just as creative in response. And I think that comes in a couple different ways. First is through legislation, as you mentioned, leveraging the city's ability to direct how its dollars are spent by requiring employers to meet certain standards so that we know that when our public dollars are being used for a private contract, those public dollars are funding quality jobs that have livable wages, benefits, and are not being used to fight any unionization effort. Second is using the platform that our elected leaders have, such as President Green, to highlight the issues that the city is facing. The city recently wrapped up a report, for instance, on the state of long-term care in St. Louis. And while the city itself has very little authority to govern what is happening in our long-term care facilities, spoiler notes, it's not great. They are able to highlight this issue and put pressure both on the hedge funds that are more and more owning these facilities, put pressure on the state legislature to advocate and to support rule changes that are being made at the federal level. We've also had a responsible contractor bill passed, as I mentioned, and so we need to be creative in how we address these problems and also be humble. I recognize that I do not have all of the solutions to these problems, and so want to be thought partners with both elected leaders and workers on the ground, because they are the experts in their experience and know the challenges they face in the workplace, and we need to be creative on how to find those solutions by working together.
Yeah, thank you. I think we just saw that recently when it talks about healthcare here in St. Louis with a place that recently closed. Do you mind saying how that's happening now?
Right. So recently, last year, 2 weeks before Christmas, Northview facility, long-term care facility, one of the largest in the city, closed overnight and illegally and terminated all of their employees. And so residents were moved to new locations without their family members being told where they went. One resident was missing for over a week, and 2 weeks before Christmas, hundreds of workers lost their job. And to this day, they are still waiting to be paid their final paycheck, be paid out on all of their benefits. And so they were stolen from. I want to be very clear. This is no different than me picking your pocket right here. But because of how the rules are rigged against working people, it will be months, if not years, of litigation until they are able to be made whole. And the city's response, I want to say, was phenomenal, though. We had city leaders there the next morning highlighting this issue, helping connect family members with the residents who had been moved to new locations, helping connect workers who had lost their jobs with new opportunities, and exploring new ways to ensure that this doesn't happen again, because we're facing a pandemic of greed in long-term care facilities. They're being bought up by hedge fund owners who are exclusively interested in pulling as much profit as possible out of these care facilities and not interested in taking care of our loved ones, our seniors, and not interested in taking care of the workers. And so we're looking at ways that the city can fill in to address this issue, or at least raise red flags when the state is unable or unwilling to take the necessary action, whether that's through code enforcement or inspections. Northview, unfortunately, was in a pretty deplorable state as a building before it closed. And that's because the state does not have enough inspectors. It had been 2 years since a surveyor had gone through and done a full inspection of that facility. And Northview is not unique in that case. So getting eyes on the city from the city in these facilities is one way that we can raise these red flags and prevent this problem from happening in the future.
Thank you. I think it's important for all of us to know, a lot of us here are in a privileged place where we talk about these things kind of abstractly, and I think it's important to, and I want to thank you for showing the realization that these are real men and women's lives that were upended right before Christmas, real men and women who depend on a paycheck, who have yet to receive that. And sometimes how we treat and act towards our most vulnerable says a lot about us as well.
Jim, if I may.
Absolutely.
If I could also chime in there, what Rhiannon was talking about, there's a term for that, and it's called wage theft. And there are cities across the country that are implementing wage theft ordinances, particularly at the local level, recognizing that the state and the federal government tend to not act quickly or act at all on these types of cases. And while, we are in a high preemption state, this is something that the board is looking at our ability as a city to provide some enforcement around wage theft. And I also want to speak to something that we did do earlier this session, and that was create an impacted tenants fund. We know that what happened at Northview can happen anywhere, and we saw just shortly after that another senior living facility, Heritage House, had their pipes break and displaced a lot of their members there. And while it was not a full assisted living facility, it was still senior living where there were services and things on site. And we understand as a board that this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and so the city needs to have a fund to be able to support folks who are being displaced if things like this happen. And so we started up the fund this past year with $100,000 in seed money. We'll be looking at increasing that fund over the next year so that there is that support system in place for if and when these types of emergency situations do happen.
Thank you very much. And to that, it's nice to know that there are funds there for available, and the Board of Aldermen are looking at these issues. But there are also a number of different economic vehicles that the city has at its disposal. So I'll ask you, Stephen, what, if any, do you think is an approach to attach workers or issues that are important to workers or workers' rights to some of the economic vehicles that the city has available?
No, I think it's a really interesting question, and there's a couple facets to it, I think. So when it comes to incentives, SLDC has really two areas of focus where this comes into play, one being on the real estate development side, the other on industry and business development side. So just to take a step back in time a little bit, I came to SLDC under the previous administration, actually, and the way incentives used to be distributed was really on an ad hoc basis. There was really no consistent process or evaluation as to how and where incentives were being awarded. And so that's where I really commend Neil Richardson coming in with his new vision on how we do a better job with equitable and inclusive development. So in 2021, we released a new community benefits scorecard. So if you're a developer or business who's coming to SLDC seeking an incentive, you have to come to the table prepared to negotiate on what a community benefit would look like, whether that's affordable housing, whether it's accessibility to transit, It could be potentially providing daycare on site for your project, things like that. We needed developers to show us that the projects they were doing actually had an impact on the community. So I would really like to commend our incentives team who do a thorough job evaluating these projects. And I think SLDC actually evaluates these things at a much deeper level than most economic development agencies across the country. We are very thorough vetting the projects that come to the table, and we know who the bad actors are. And quite frankly, if you come to the table with a reputation, we're not going to work with you. We also oversee the MWBE compliance. So if you are going to receive an incentive from SLDC, you have to meet a certain requirement of MWBE contractors that'll be on site doing the project.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but MWBE for those.
Minority and women-owned business enterprises. So if you're a developer doing a project, a real estate project, you have to hire a certain threshold, and you can learn more about that through the disparity study. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but if you don't meet that criteria, you will not receive an incentive, or at least you have to show a good faith effort that you tried to hire a certain level of MWBE contractors. So that's point number one, is that we thoroughly vet the developers we work with. And if you're not paying your subcontractors, that we do find out about through the compliance team, and your incentive will be shut off, and we will not work with you until you've made everyone whole. So that's really on the real estate side. When it comes to industry and business development, that's really more about job creation. So say we get a project from a company that's creating X amount of jobs. Well, there's a certain requirement that you have to meet in order to receive a benefit for those jobs. One is that you have to pay at least 90% of the average median income for the St. Louis City, for instance. Not off the top of my head, but that's somewhere around $52,000. So you have to be within the 90% threshold of that. And then if in certain areas, if it's an enhanced enterprise zone or an extremely distressed area, that threshold lowers to 80% AMI. So you must hit those benchmarks if you're going to receive a benefit off those new jobs created. And there's a minimum amount of jobs you have to create to receive that incentive as well. The other piece is you have to provide at least 50% health care to all the new employees that you're hiring. So if you cannot meet both of those benchmarks, you will not be eligible to receive any benefit from SLDC or any of our partners, whether it's the state or local municipalities. So,
Thank you. I think it's important to hear some of the things that have been kind of, I wouldn't say put in place, but re-emphasized with the SLDC now, because there's a question later in the program about the process and the new systemized enforcement. So
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Jim, if I can
Absolutely.
also add a little something to that too. I think, we have come a long way over the last few years in terms of the way that we do incentives. It used to just be you apply for it and you pretty much rubber stamp, got it. And I do want to commend SLDC for a much more rigorous process now in determining those incentives. One of the things that the Board of Aldermen will be looking at doing in partnership with SLDC and labor and variety of different stakeholders over this next legislative session is looking at community benefit agreement legislation. So what does a real community benefit process look like? It may look a little bit different for every project, but we want to make sure that we get to a standardized place so that we're not in a place where a development gets all the way, to the Board of Aldermen, to the HUD's committee, and then, members say, we're really not okay with this unless XYZ, public benefits are attached to it. We do that work on the front end because we have a standardized process for getting there. And so the economic development scorecard that SLDC has right now, I think is a great start. And the work that we'll be doing is to build off of that and build a real community benefit structure going forward so that there's more continuity for what developers should expect when coming to the city, but there's also we're also making sure that there are true community benefits that are attached to the projects that we're pursuing.
if I may, could I provide one example?
Absolutely.
Real quick. So I'll leave the company name out of it, but we recently had a major project announce an expansion in the city of St. Louis, And part of the community of benefit agreement for them to receive incentives was to work with our city partners at SLATE, so the St. Louis Agency for Training and Employment. So this company was creating about 500 jobs. And so on the front end, we negotiated with them, okay, you know, you're looking for a specific set of skills, and SLATE can help connect you with communities to help fill those positions. And so we did make it a requirement that they would hire a certain amount of positions from, you know, X neighborhood through SLATE to create job creation, create more access to jobs. So it was a great example of a partnership, how SLDC not only works with the private sector, but we work with our city agencies as well to kind of connect those dots to create that access.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And Slate does a wonderful job, making sure that men and women have the resources they need to fit the roles that are available here in the city of St. Louis. And another organization that does a superb job and is recognized for the same world or nationwide, and it's an international, so I'm sure worldwide, is the IBEW Local 1. And so that leads me to you, John. Currently here, what are the biggest challenges do you see that union members are facing here in the city of St. Louis, and what do you think that the city can do to address some of those issues that you see?
Well, thanks, Jim. You did touch on it in one of your other questions. Certainly, it'll resonate with everybody in this room tonight as anti-worker legislation. Certainly, we saw the Board of Aldermen pass the minimum wage increase, and the GOP reached in pretty quickly and rescinded that just within a matter of months. Now, thankfully, through grassroots political activism, thanks to Jim Lappy and Raise Up Missouri, Proposition B did get passed, and we do have a higher minimum wage than average here in the state of Missouri, but at tremendous cost and tremendous effort. And as you see right now, as I speak here tonight, the GOP in the state legislature is trying to gut the initiative petition process to prevent that, take away the voice and the vote of their constituents. So
which is a way that a number of pro-worker legislation has been passed the last number of years, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And I mean, we defeated right to work in this state with the initiative petition process. And probably, so when I say it's a significant threat, I'll just give you an example. So I represent a public sector unit, the Metropolitan Sewer District, and Jared Taylor from Nixa, Missouri. It's these rural outstate Republicans reaching in and trying to gut these protections for working families. And he proposed HB 1413, which rewrote the state public sector labor law, which made it tremendously difficult for us to represent our members. And we scrambled to get our groups certified over there at MSD and at Hazelwood, all the groups we represent that are public sector employees, to make sure that they could continue to receive our protection. But it was very punitive, cost a lot of money. It was a tremendous amount of work. Now, thanks to the teachers union and the good work of Sally Barker at Schuket, Cook and Werner, that law was declared unconstitutional. But you know, this kind of stuff, and I don't know why rural Republican legislators like to reach in and try and gut the protections of working families in this city. But I want to say a couple of things. First of all, it's gratifying for me as a trade unionist to have so many allies in city government. Christine, Megan, it's really gratifying. You know, this is unprecedented to even have this discussion. So that's very gratifying for us. But, and I'm also thankful that the mayor selected Nancy Cross as the executive director of operations. Nancy is one of the most strongest trade unionists I've ever had the pleasure of meeting as a labor representative. But I would like to see some of the legislation that's been proposed that didn't make it through the city reintroduced. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Now, I was a big fan of Alderwoman Martin, and I really appreciated her prevailing wage ordinance that she got passed. I think that goes a long way to ensuring the incentives that are given, doled out by the city, ensure that the workers on those projects receive fair and equitable wages and earn the economic standards that have been established for their craft trade. However, I have found that it isn't always properly enforced. And I have personally taken that on. It takes a tremendous amount of time to audit those payroll records. And I know that the SLDC has contracted with Headcount, and I haven't, I'm going to be clear, I haven't had any interaction with Headcount at all. I'm not saying anything negative about Headcount, But I am saying that personally, I've seen several projects in the city where I have found significant underpayment for workers. And I think it's important that the city consider, if not Board Bill 197, which was introduced by Alderman Martin for a prevailing wage compliance officer, then at least someone that can do oversight of an agency like Headcount, which is a for-profit agency. The other thing I think is very important, and it was a discussion, Alderwoman Velasquez introduced a bill on construction apprenticeships. I think that I would appreciate it if they would give that serious consideration, and I would like to see that type of legislation added to these incentive packages, to these abatements. And the reason I say that is, we talk about minority participation in these goals that we set, and that's very important. I'm very proud of the IBW. I got one of my officers for the Electrical Workers Minority Caucus here tonight. The IBW chartered a division in 1972 wholly devoted to equity and inclusion, and called the Electrical Workers Minority Caucus, and I'm very proud of the work that they've done. So I believe the IBW has been on the front side of this for a long time, but in my experience on the ground as a labor representative who goes on these projects, is these mandates does not translate into minority workers on these projects and boots on the ground, and that's where we need to do better.
Yeah, I think what I hear you saying is that we have a lot of changes. We've talked about a lot of changes in laws that hurt workers, right? We've talked a lot about changes in laws that people want to bring that would help workers, right? But what about current laws that are on the books, right, to improve the lives of workers, to be enforced on the lines that we work? You mentioned Headcount, which is a private organization that I know SLDC has been using and people are getting used to. And he talked about a couple of ordinances and stuff that are on the books now. But if there's no enforcement on the books, what are they doing to help? President Green, do you have anything to add to that?
Absolutely. First I'll take ownership that the city struggles with enforcement across the board. It does not matter whether it is enforcement of worker ordinances or housing ordinances or civil rights ordinances. We struggle across the board with enforcement. And I think that one of the things that I'm learning from conversations with so many stakeholders is I think one of the reasons we struggle is because enforcement is very spread out across the city. That enforcement is often with a variety of different organizations or divisions within city government, and there's not really a centralized location where there's one entity whose full job is enforcement. And so what often ends up happening is when we've passed one piece of legislation that puts enforcement over here and another piece of legislation that puts it over here, it ends up kind of falling on the back burner of the list of things that need to be done in a lot of our city departments. And so one of the things that my office is currently in the process of doing is going through all this past legislation, figuring out where have we tasked enforcement to lie on all of these past pieces of legislation that we've passed, and is there a way to create a more unified place for enforcement so it's one entity's full-time job to enforce, and we're not having to always look back at different ordinances and say, well, this is supposed to be enforced by this division of city government, but this part is being enforced by this part of city government. Not only makes it confusing for us, it makes it confusing for the public who's looking to have the legislation that we've passed previously be enforced.
Yeah, John, it sounds like you've gone quite a bit on this. Can you weigh in on that kind of difficulty?
It is challenging, and I think if you've been around as long as I have, and you remember what the prevailing wage law used to be in the state before it was upended with the supermajority Republicans in the General Assembly, enforcement was a big deal, and one of the ways that anti-worker legislators got around prevailing wage was to gut the funding for the enforcement agents at the Wage and Hour Division. And when they had the money, they did really good work. And there was a lot of wage restitution paid, and we were able to sort of sift through and find out who the bad actors were. But with no enforcement, there's really no way to reveal who's playing by the rules and who isn't. And as somebody that represents electrical workers who make the prevailing economic standard on every job, whether it's mandated or not, one of the ways we try to level the playing field is ensure those laws are enforced. And what's interesting is that I spend a lot of my time getting wage restitution for people that I don't represent.
Echoing what President Green said earlier about rising tides lifting all boats, and what Ms. Duryea had said about having, unfortunately, being in the fortunate position that a union job and with good wages there, that something that should be entitled to everybody. And then we like to think that our brothers and sisters and fellow citizens here in the city have to make those things not lucky to have health insurance and not lucky to have a family supporting job, but that should be de jure. Looking at the schedule here, we're at time for some questions and forms that were turned in earlier in the event. And actually, some of these parlay quickly into what we were talking about. The first one is actually directed to you, President Green. It says that according to Ordinance 69427, which was Board Bill 297, Section 12, there's a reporting requirement that wherein I guess companies and construction companies are supposed to report on the minority and city participation numbers annually on September 30th to the Board of Aldermen to see what kind of compliance is being done for those entities that receive economic incentives. How does someone get a copy of these reports?
That's a very great question. Under the current process, they get filed with our clerk at the Board of Aldermen. What we're looking at doing as a board is creating a more public process. So once we get those compliance documents given to us, we need to be getting them up online. And that is one of the tasks that we're looking at for this next legislative session. So it's not just this ordinance, it's a lot of ordinances. And we're finding that historically there's been dozens upon dozens of annual reports that we're supposed to be getting. Some we actually get, some I think departments have completely forgotten that they were ever supposed to give us these reports. And so Alderwoman Ingracia, former Alderwoman Ingracia in my
She'll always be an alderwoman to me.
Always be an alderwoman to me too. Christine in my office has been tasked with actually going through all the past legislation and figuring out what reports we're supposed to be getting, on what timeline, figuring out what has actually been in compliance, what has not. So we can first notify those departments or entities that they haven't been doing that, and then the follow-up piece of that will be, once we figure out those nuts and bolts, starting to get all that information up online in a way that can be accessed by the public.
Thank you very much. The next question actually is similar, and I'll direct this to you, Mr. Davis, is can you explain if through SLDC or through your projects, there's a person who does monitor and enforce prevailing wages when they apply?
So we have a whole team dedicated to that, led by Stacy Fowler. So every project, we have a team of maybe 5-6 people that are constantly looking at those numbers and communicating with contractors and the project managers, making sure that the subcontractors are getting paid, and that with the headcount issue, making sure that the people who need to be on site are actually there, right? Making sure that those numbers are accurate.
How long has this team been together, or how long have been using headcount? And not you, but
not me. And that's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that question accurately, but they've been using headcount for as long as I've been at SLDC, which is over 3 years. I'm sure they were using it prior to that.
Mr. Carl, if you know quite a bit about prevailing wage, do you have an idea?
I don't. I've never, I audit the records to try to keep everybody on the same level, and I just find underpayment almost continually. So, and there's no, I really, in the city in particular, I don't have anywhere to go to ensure that, to get that wage restitution for those workers, except to inform them. So that's what I'm doing now, is with a formal document, informing them, look, here's what I discovered. And then I also notify SLDC. And then I think sometimes I have heard that there's fractional restitution paid, but not anything that I have seen on paper and calculated that they're due.
Okay.
So that's where it's at right now. I just.
No,
and
excellent. And you know, and I'm sure the men and women who get letters from you, letting them know that they may be entitled to pay that they should have gotten. I hope those men and women recognize the work that you're doing on behalf and that you're able to do because IBEW allows you to do it. The last question that I have is actually, again, for you, President Green, but it's regarding nursing home rules. We'd like to know if you have any comments or thoughts on the new CMS nursing home staffing rule.
You mean added to city government?
Yes.
Yes, I am in support of that, and think that needs to be one part of a bigger kind of worker compliance office. Although that position, it may make the most sense to have it with the health department, but I think that again, it goes back to enforcement and being able to hold bad actors accountable, being able to find issues before they become catastrophic issues. And we can't do that if we don't have the specific staff positions to be able to do that. So I'm definitely in support of that, and looking forward or going forward, and really interested in figuring out what all the positions that we need in city government to make sure that we're actually enforcing the laws that we do have on the books, and then going beyond and figuring out what other areas we're able to do more worker supports in the city.
And I'm sorry, this is my failing. Can you explain for the members of the public what the CMS staffing rule is?
So we're essentially looking at a staffing role that, as Rhiannon was saying earlier, the state does not often inspect the way that we need them to inspect, and they often don't do that follow-up the way that they need to be doing the follow-up. So it's looking at, creating a position within city government that could be holding some of those long-term care facilities and perhaps some other facilities in compliance, and whether that be through building codes or health codes or other types of city ordinances that can make sure that they are in compliance, rather than just relying on the state to do inspections that they have not been doing.
Thank you very much. I'm getting notice that our time for this is over. I'm sure the moderators and the folks here up at the panel can stick around for a little while for those of you who are here in public. But I think our time on television is going to be cut short. So again, I want to thank everybody for your insight, everybody who asked questions, who attended, who shared your knowledge and your positions with us. And again, thank you to IBEW Local 1 for hosting this event. It's a proud thing that we have here in the city, and it's nice to see everybody coming together to help those of us help each other who work and make the city run. So thank you very much.